Good afternoon, Haiti Oropesa with Florida You Judge, and today I have a colleague, attorney Craig Whisenhunt. He is with the Florida Law Group. Am I correct, Craig? I have to correct
Yes.
that on the ticker, but his phone number's on there. He's going to be talking with me for the benefit of the public. He has very smart attorney. If I were in trouble, he's on the top of the list of who I would call. We're going to be talking about what's headlining heavily the Fauci hearing that began this past month in July. He was subpoenaed to appear to provide testimony after his personal diary was made public by Senator Rand Paul. And so Craig's going to join me in having a conversation about um, this story and case. Thanks for joining me, Craig.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So some people might think that this is the first time that he's been before Congress to testify about COVID issues from 2020. And now is taking the fifth and doesn't want to cooperate, as that's a narrative that's being put out, that he doesn't want to cooperate in answering questions. Can you tell us a little bit about the prior hearings that he did have where he fully cooperated and testified under oath? First, starting with the 2021 congressional hearing.
Sure. So I, I think at the onset of it, it's really important to remember that Anthony Fauci has occupied a prominent place in health and government for a very long time under multiple administrations led by multiple, both political parties. This is a man who has been in front of Congress many, many times over his career. And he has spoken, kind of as a force for public health and for the general welfare of the American people many times. That said, most of what we're focusing on right now is his role in the response to the COVID pandemic. And even to that, he's appeared multiple times in front of Congress, both full Senate committee hearings, much like the one from last week, but as well as House committee meetings where he's been asked to talk about not only the origins of this virus, uh, but the response that the United States and our global partners have had to it. There is an investigation into how NIH funding may have been used by the lab in China, where some people believe this virus may have had some relation. He's talked about those things. He has always been a willing and largely transparent participant in those hearings. I think the better question right now isn't why is it that he wasn't as forthcoming now, but why was he asked in this instance to come back before Congress?
Right. So I just wanted to, because I've had to get up to speed myself. I think we as voters, we need to get up to speed. Before the broadcast started, we were kind of speaking a little bit, and you made a great point that we are so overwhelmed with work and with the life pressures and responsibilities that sometimes it's hard to dedicate the time necessary so that we can get up to speed with these matters, so that we know what's going on and who to vote for. So um I had to do my due diligence in looking back, and what I learned was, and you correct me if I'm wrong, in 2021 and 2024, when he did testify, one in front of the Senate, then there was a subcommittee with the House. All these issues already been asked, and he answered them without pleading the fifth. And so, like you just indicated, the more important question is why he's being brought back. Is there anything we know that he was subpoenaed after the personal diary, which was, I think, 1,100 pages that was published, that was made available to Senator Rand Paul? Is that a smoking gun, Craig?
Probably not. I mean, in as much as has been released publicly, there doesn't seem to be anything in it um, that would dramatically change what we've all come to understand the facts to be. There was a line out of context line that Rand Paul has really kind of grabbed onto that suggests relatively soon after the first symptomatic individuals had been identified in China. Anthony Fauci wrote within his journal, and I'm paraphrasing, that
Hmm.
the market may not have been the origin, but the amplifier. The next line of that, however, still remains that they believe this was zootropic in nature, that it moved from animals to people, still within that region. It's kind of like having a question of, well, what is the origin of a bullet? Is it, we know it came out of the gun, but the bullet was purchased somewhere and put in the gun, but it was manufactured somewhere else, right? Its component parts came from somewhere else. You can keep working your way backwards. Dr. Paul has taken this position that this is an inconsistency with Dr. Fauci's prior testimony of the belief that this marketplace represented where the virus took hold within a human population. It isn't really inconsistent with that belief, but even if that position evolves over time, one of the things we expect from medical professionals and scientists is that their position can evolve with new information. So there isn't a haha, we got you part of what at least has been released so far. What there is an opportunity to say, oh, you said some kind of embarrassing things. Honestly, I think the release of the 1,100 pages may be more embarrassing for Dr. Fauci than the congressional hearing was in front of the Senate, where he refused to answer the questions. I think the substance and opinions he shared within that of the competency of certain members of multiple administrations is probably more of an embarrassment for him. But he doesn't have the political bite that parading him in front of a Senate hearing for no legitimate purpose and having him repeatedly refuse to answer questions has. Both sides emerged out of that hearing with a lot of political fodder for their respective bases.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think he regrets like publishing his personal diary on a government server?
So I think it's really important to bear in mind that when it has come to be kind of remarked upon as a personal diary, it really is more of a daily journal of his professional efforts. And so it was appropriately maintained on those servers. It's also really important to remember that those servers um, were there in 2019 into 2020. They remained available to all of the other individuals who may have had access or reason to have access to them during the initial period there. So during the final year of Donald Trump's first presidential administration, Dr. Fauci was his guy. And these records were maintained appropriately so, but under that administration's obligations. So this isn't brand new information. What it is information that has potentially political value right now during a cycle leading into midterm elections where both parties are trying to grapple with a very dynamic political landscape and a need to promote kind of talking points to their bases that will motivate them. And
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you, do you think they already had this since he had been generating it and then now they're releasing it?
they certainly have had it. The best we know from the timeline of the so-called Fauci diary is that RFK had assembled all of these daily accountings and dispersed that to several members within the Republican Party in Congress in early July, at least, and possibly earlier in time even than that. And certainly he would have been privy to those things, and other individuals within the his department would have had access to them. It's not like they happen to move a book aside and find a personal diary tucked underneath of something. These were all maintained government records that were eminently obtainable and reviewable by those within the administration.
Okay. And maybe they're looking for something to bring out now before the midterms. Yes?
Sure, I mean both sides are, and that's really where this put into context. We have a subpoena going out to Dr. Fauci on or around July 23rd. He's asked to come in and speak to the Senate here last week. While that is going on, we also have two massive foodborne illnesses spreading across the country. the cyclospora spread, as well as the salmonella outbreak. So there are some prominent health issues currently impacting Americans right now that are worth our government's time and attention to. And there are questions that should probably be answered about those, about how it is that these contaminated food products made it their way to the marketplace, let alone disperse that widely, and how challenging it was to scope where they had come from and protect American consumers. That's a real present day matter. Rehashing and recycling a 2019-2020 debate probably isn't going to help many Americans today. There are important questions, I think, about pandemic response that are worth continuing to investigate. That isn't the motive of this particular hearing. This hearing was an effort to try and say, hey, we have these journal entries that might sort of be inconsistent with some things you told us before, and we want to talk to you about that. And it was really more than anything, and as Dr. Fauci kind of reflected in his opening remarks, an overt effort to try and create a criminal act out of him. And he simply wasn't going to participate in doing so.
Okay, so I've kind of gathered from what I've been reading. I don't think that they are, because there are those perspectives that there are people that are experts that are saying that there's no inconsistency. He was not inconsistent in what his perspectives were as to how the virus originated. So this was to me, what you're saying, it looks like that to me, at least. I don't think that they're gonna find anything, but yet now they want to try to hold him in contempt for asserting his Fifth Amendment. So I'm gonna just play a clip real quickly, and then I'd like you to react.
Well, nothing says honesty like taking the fifth, huh, Doc? Let's try something. What day of the week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color's the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Let's just get one thing straight. You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs, they know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt. Contempt for this body and contempt for the American people. But I think I know why you're doing it. It's because you don't want to answer questions. It's because you did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic you got rich, didn't you? You got rich while people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally, cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Well, nothing says honesty like taking the fifth.
Okay, so I know you have a lot to say about that.
A few things.
Yeah.
So I would start off with, we'll take a backseat just for a moment and a distraction down constitutional principles. Your rights not to incriminate yourself don't originate under the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment simply is the mechanism that protects the rights that already existed. So there's a nerdy frustration with the verbiage that his lawyers prepared him with, pursuant to his rights protected by the Fifth Amendment would have been the better phrasing. I don't think that's really the most important point of it, but it's kind of like calling something very unique. It's one of those personal aggravations of where the rights originate from. But the other thing that's really important to remember is he was pardoned by Joe Biden as Joe Biden's administration was leaving. And there's two things within that I think we have to consider. One, there has been suggestion and argument made by many members of the Republican Senate and Congress, as well as the White House and the executive administration, that those pardons may not have been legitimate. We haven't really seen that fully vetted out or tested yet. But if I were in the position of any of those people who received preemptive pardons, that might well be something in the back of my mind. The other aspect of it is, while a pardon might protect him from crimes that he had committed up until that date and time, and the statute of limitations generally for false statements to Congress or perjury or contempt of Congress are 5 years. So we're at the edge of that for a lot of the comments in the past. But it doesn't protect you from anything you do today. And suppose, and we'll take the stupid example of what color is your tie. But if they asked him what color his tie was back then and he had said blue, and he's wearing the exact same tie now and he says gray. Now the issue is, were you lying then or are you lying now? And if the argument becomes, oh, well, we think you're lying now, then that isn't protected by the pardon. So he still is very vulnerable. And he's left with a very difficult choice because he knows he can't refuse the subpoena. And it's important to note, they subpoenaed him to appear. They compelled his appearance. They compelled his appearance under oath. They haven't treated every person while conducting important investigations that way. As an example, very recently, when they called Pam Bondi to testify, they elected to allow her to do so in a closed-door session without being placed under oath. Right? And that begs the question, well, what is the difference here? What is the underlying motive? What is the reason they wanted to ask these questions at all? And I think you see it there. They're trying to remind the American people of a narrative that they see as valuable to their base and valuable politically going into this last stretch before the midterms. That's why they did it. Had Dr. Fauci answered what color his tie was or what color the carpet was, then what we would have is a response of, okay, so you can answer some questions when you know that you can't get in trouble for them. You're only refusing to answer the questions that you think answering could get you into trouble, right? And so that becomes their soundbite. There's going to be a soundbite no matter what. I think from a legal perspective, he doesn't have a Fifth Amendment right not to answer the question about what color the carpet is or what color his tie is. There's no scenario where that could incriminate him. I do think he has a right to protect himself from answering questions about accumulated wealth or associations with other industries or how the government handled certain matters that he's testified to previously, because they could suggest he may be being dishonest about that work now, and at the very least prosecute that even as weak as it is and cause him some reputational harm or at least the aggravation of a prosecution. I think politically the decision was made, we're just not going to answer anything. We'll show up, we'll let them ask their questions, we're going to refuse to say a word. I don't think a Department of Justice criminal referral will go anywhere. If Congress wants to hold him in contempt without a referral, they are certainly welcome to do so, but there won't be any real ramifications of it. It's a show contempt hearing just for their base. But this allows Democrats in turn to point out, hey, we agree with the senator, right? Nothing like pleading the fifth if you're being honest. And then they can just roll tape of the hundreds of times that President Trump has himself exercised his rights as protected under the Fifth Amendment not to make potentially incriminating responses while continuing to maintain his true innocence of any of the allegations at issue. So now you can have it both ways. And really, that's all this became, is it's a political stunt. And they both sides try to navigate it to a way that allowed them to gain some political traction from it.
So, but it does look, they're doing that because it does look to some people, it's gonna look like he's guilty of something by doing this.
Sure. But those are
Um,
probably people who already held that view of him. It
or that
reaffirms what we expected.
are not gonna go and read the everything that has happened in the past. For instance, Joe Biden. Why did Joe Biden give him the pardon?
I don't have any special insight into that. I think the prevailing theory of Joe Biden's kind of granting of preemptive pardons at the end of his administration came from a belief that we would see a dramatic weaponization of the executive branch's authority over the Department of Justice, and political adversaries or politically dissident individuals might become the target of not genuine prosecutions, but politically motivated retribution. And I think there's a fair argument to be made that we have seen that all the way up until as recently as last week, when the federal government had to file a motion to dismiss charges against a former Olympic canoer for vandalism of the reflecting pool after having to file a federal brief admitting that the damage to the reflecting pool was the consequence of an improper installation and had nothing to do with private citizens reaching in and peeling off paint that never had adhered to concrete, right? But there's an approach by this administration, particularly when it comes to politically adverse or staunch opponents to the administration, either now or in the past, to shoot first and worry about aiming later. And the consequence of that is a lot of failed prosecutions and misuse of government. But I think the apprehension and fear as Biden left office was real. I think we've seen it kind of bear out. And so these preemptive pardons for prominent members of his administration and his family, I think were designed to try to insulate them from that retribution and misuse of government.
I did read in the past. I mean, Rand Paul has been gunning for him since 2021. And I think he may
Yeah,
have made comments about he wanted to put him behind bars. And
he
Trump,
has.
while campaigning, was discussing about an investigation into Dr. Fauci. So let me ask you a question. Is it possible for someone that's being questioned and asserting the fifth, can they just not say it? So like there's a standing Fifth Amendment that I'm asserting, but he has to repeat again and again the actual script of in invoking it.
So yes and no.
Okay.
In the context of this situation, you essentially can't, because in a congressional hearing, it's not a criminal investigation where, as you and I both would know, if you were under a criminal investigation and law enforcement says, "Hey, we want to talk to you," and you assert your right to counsel or you assert your right to remain silent, right?
Mhm.
They are to immediately stop. They're not
Right.
allowed to ask you anything else. Um, that differs from a congressional oversight type of hearing because each individual member of that committee actually has the right to make an inquiry. They don't all actually use it, but they're all allowed and have a right as members of that committee to inquire of the witness. So you can't start with one and say, look, I'm just not going to answer anything, right? And
Mm,
then nobody else gets to ask. Each question kind of has to then stand on its own as to whether or not he's
got
going
it.
to or not. So for each
Okay.
member, he needed to assert the right. And for each question, because there may have been other matters to which he would have been, in theory, responsive to. There have been plenty of instances where one member wants to talk about, one thing, and then three members later, the inquiry is into something completely different. In this instance, we know that wasn't the case. There was a coordinated effort, and that's not improper, right? Political
Mhm.
parties of both persuasions have used these committee hearings for political purposes. I think as voting members of the public, we should all be appalled by that use of our taxpayer dollars for political gain. They should be using these hearing times to better policy and legislative pursuits on behalf of all of us. But both sides do that and have always done that. And I don't foresee an end to that, even as much as it might frustrate those of us who want our government to work as a functional being. It is what it is. But he did have to, in this context, continuously reassert that he would not answer the question because he has a right not to.
Do you think they're gonna be successful? I mean, Paul, and I don't know if I already played this, but
It's already been scheduled for next week for a vote on contempt of Congress. I think the courts will have to figure out whether or not, if you have a complete pardon, whether you have liability against incrimination. Can you incriminate yourself if you have a pardon? It's already been.
so do you think that they're gonna legally be able to hold him in contempt if he's asserting his fifth because he can, because the post pardon, if he answers something that's truly inconsistent, he can be subject to criminal liability.
Correct, because they could still make an argument of, we think you're lying to us today, and we believe you're lying to us today because previously you had said something different, and if we were to take that prior statement under oath as the truth, and you were now saying something different, we believe you're lying to us today, for which the pardon would not have any application. So that's the setup. It really does become are you lying then or are you lying now? And I think his apprehension was because there was so much appetite to try to nitpick prior statements or peel them apart or take them out of context, that really for him to say anything at all would invite exactly that type of criminal referral or investigation. It isn't likely to have gone anywhere. The one thing that's been largely consistent with Dr. Fauci over time is he does, when he answers questions, very often commit to the fact that those positions may evolve. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. So he's offering the best answer that he can in a moment, which is what you would expect from someone in his position. But for him to say, well, yes, I told you then, we believe the origin point of it was whatever, and that this discussion about it was engineered in a lab is ridiculous, right? And then he goes on later in an interview with a magazine to talk about, well, the idea of a conspiracy theory that it originated in a lab isn't necessarily ridiculous. Well, is that an inconsistent that could support a prosecution? And I think it's because he's really having two different conversations there. One, he's telling Congress, I don't have any evidence of what you're describing as a conspiracy to generate or to evolve a virus from an animal to human host originating in a lab. I don't have anything like that. That's a conspiracy theory for which I can't offer any support. And then to the magazine, what he is saying is that could happen. It just didn't. Like, the idea of such a conspiracy isn't unfounded. Those are possible, plausible things that could occur. They just didn't occur here. And so you have two different conversations around a very similar talking point with two very different answers. And the risk of a retaliatory and vindictive Department of Justice grabbing hold of those things and trying to make something of nothing is a reason for people to be apprehensive and not willing to answer even innocuous questions like, what color is their tie?
Could they not have possibly saved time by just going through the complete diary and just seeing, okay, this definitively is proof that he lied in past hearings, and then instead of having this whole hearing?
Well, if there was a clear example of that, I think we would have seen them do precisely that. I mean, they entered into the record of this hearing the pages of the diary that they referenced. And I think Dr. Paul ultimately introduced hundreds, if not all of them, but they become part of the congressional record of the inquiry. But if there was a genuinely, absolute, unequivocal, in context disagreement between what he said in the diary and what he said to Congress, they would have showcased that very prominently. That would be the soundbite over and over again. We don't have that. And a lot of why we don't have that is his daily impressions, even within the diary, evolve daily.
Mm-hmm.
He's being fed new information, and so his perceptions changed. So
and then what about? Sorry,
go ahead.
Go.
No.
Go.
Well, I think so. The suggestion that you could hold his prior written statement within the diary as the definitive, this is what he believed to be true when he later testified in front of Congress. Each instance is his best impression in the moment. So I don't think they would get very far with that. And I don't think they'll get very far with a criminal referral on his refusal to answer questions about his tie, because I don't know that they'll be able to establish that they had a genuine and legitimate legislative interest in the color of his tie.
What about this term that we're continuously hearing now with this story, gain of function, and whether he knew that he was funding, allowing monies to flow to an agency that then donated the money to the Wuhan laboratory, um, and gain of function, that he knew that it was going to be used for a nefarious, bad reason, the research.
Sure. And I think it's really important to remember the first time we talked about the idea of gain of function in the lens of any kind of controversy was in 2020, right? So during the first Trump administration, there was a lot of then attention to this Wuhan lab. How is it being funded? Where was the money coming from? Was there American dollars being spent in this lab? It garnered a lot of attention because of this premise of generating a virus for the gain of function to become very infectious across human populations. The underlying organization there is one called Eco Health Alliance, and they were the recipients of National Institute of Health grants. And they did have collaborations with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Those are objective facts that we do know those things are true. But there isn't, it's kind of like that missing link chart where there's still a question mark. There isn't a direct link between the NIH grants, Eco Health Alliance, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and these gain of function endeavors that are believed to have been pursued within that lab. It's a large lab. It's doing a lot of differing works. Most labs do a widespread nature of work. So it may very well be that that missing link exists somewhere, and that in fact there was misuse, and that there is a connection there. There just hasn't been anything to support or prove that yet. But it's that conversation started in 2020, and it emerged in 21. There was congressional review and oversight of those issues. I think if there was something there, we would have seen it by now. There certainly is every reason and incentive for Republicans, if that exists, to share it, to substantiate all of their arguments that they're even making now. There just doesn't seem to be any there.
All right, and then I'm just gonna have you look at one more clip. You probably already saw it, but I was a little bit bothered, or a lot bothered, by this senator who made it a point to run for the Senate. He said he sold his businesses and wanted to become a senator, and was like gleefully threw an F-bomb at Dr. Fauci, asking him what the F, because he was pissed off at some of the policies that occurred in 2020 when, like, as you say, things were evolving. At one moment, you might think something, believe something, and then it changes. But so I'm going to just show this a clip. It's 5 minutes long. I don't think I'm going to let it go that much, but just I want your reaction.
Sure.
Mr. Fauci, do you know who David Schertler is?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. What does the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution say?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
No, I'm just asking you what it says.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm going to give the Constitution to my aide. He'll bring it over to you so you can have it for future reference. I think it's something that every American should know what the Constitution says. Do you know who wrote the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So you're invoking a right that you don't know who wrote it or what it says. Is that correct?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Wow. All right, let me tell you who David Schertler is for the audience, because he was ejected by the chairman. He's a high-profile criminal attorney. He's represented some really great people, like Senator Bob Menendez. Maybe that's somebody who my Democrat colleagues may remember took gold bars as bribes from the Egyptians. And there's an article here in the Washington Free Beacon that talks about why you would hire a guy like David Shurtler. And the comment is, if you're in deep shit, that's who you call. Do you feel like you're in deep shit?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Clearly, what you think today is that somehow you're above reproach. Somehow you feel like you don't need to be treated like a normal American. Can you do me a favor in the audience and stand up if during the time of the COVID pandemic you were called a racist for calling the virus a Wuhan virus or the China virus? If you thought the 6-foot rule was total crap, if you thought the vaccine wasn't something that you should take, if you thought it was outrageous the way the mask policy was rolled out, if you were fired from your job for not taking that vaccine, including members of the military, if you thought closing schools was catastrophically stupid, and that you thought that during these times saying these things made you somehow a lesser human being. Dr. Fauci, can you just turn around and look at the people behind you? You're not willing to do that? That's not a question. It's not a question. To your lawyer, it's not a question. It's a request. All you have to do is look up from your lawyers and look at the people who were absolutely shamed for saying what we know now to be the truth. You can't even look at them? That's a question. Are you able to look at them? You can sit down in the audience. There was a mom in Ohio during the...
Okay, that's a little bit long, but I believe in all the videos that I watched to prepare for this afternoon. Somebody, and I believe it was him, referred to dirtbag attorney or whatnot. There's a subtle denigration of, oh, look at who's you have. A high profile attorney that represents great people.
Sure. I hope that at no point in the gentleman's future he's in need of criminal representation, but I suspect that if the need arose, he would probably be looking for someone who is previously associated with some pretty unsavory type of characters and managed to be successful in protecting even unpopular individuals' rights and interests. There's no criminal defense lawyer, at least I'm not going to say no. There are probably a few out there that are genuinely shady and may be unethical, but by and large, both criminal defense lawyers, constitutional defense lawyers, and criminal prosecutors are interested in protecting rights and following laws and procedures. So denigrating one, suggesting somehow, oh, well, you hired the guy you hire when you did something. No, you hire the best that you can for the situation that you are in. I don't think hiring David Shurtler is an indication of guilt any more than I would hope anybody who had hired me as their lawyer, as a criminal defense lawyer for many, many, many years, would have had that impugned against them as proof of their guilt, but rather just recognition that I was an effective advocate on the interests of my clients. So I'm disappointed and discouraged to see a member of the legislation kind of denigrating the roles that lawyers play, particularly constitutional defense lawyers, which is what criminal defense lawyers fundamentally are.
Because there are innocent people.
Sure, all the time. And they need lawyers also. And there are people who are genuinely accused of crimes but may have been improperly charged and maybe more accurately prosecuted under a differing theory. There's defenses and mitigating circumstances and rights at issue. It becomes a very complex matter. I'm also curious whether or not the senator himself knows who wrote and authored the Fifth Amendment, given that much of the Bill of Rights was written by committee. And while James Madison largely gets credit for it, most of the verbiage of the Fifth Amendment was written by George Mason. I imagine he probably isn't up on the constitutional history of the drafting of the Bill of Rights as much as he was trying to make the point. I also think holding a bunch of planted individuals who were there as guests of the Republican members of the panel to stand, again, is another instance of political showmanship and theater. Right? And I don't know which of those people stood up because they've been called racist or because they had a different view of the 6-foot rule or of mask mandates or of schools being closed down, because he jumbled all of those things together. He could have just as effectively said, hey, stand up if I invited you. And we would have gotten the same response.
Right. Correct.
So,
and you know what? At this point, look, back then, even now, there are people that were supportive at the time when everybody is freaking out because we're experiencing a pandemic and nobody wanted to get sick, especially in the early stages when there were no medications. Um, some people did agree, some people still. The distancing, the mask, maybe the cloth ones weren't as effective as an N95, but no one wanted to, that was smart, wanted to be within crowds to then have a contact with the virus and then possibly die. Um, Innocent people do not plead the fifth.
yeah, it's a dangerous line to even insinuate because, again, Republicans have to deal with a reality where President Trump has invoked the Fifth Amendment hundreds of times, both within depositions and investigations related to financial frauds, the sexual assault of Eugene Carroll and the defamation suit, but also has asserted that right in sexual battery allegations upon minor children. And I don't know that you really want to start down a path of the Fifth Amendment must mean you're being dishonest, or that we should necessarily assume the opposite of my question to be true, or that the answer to my question would be bad for you. It can be, right? And both sides can read into it and take the inferences they wish to, and they will. But the right against self-incrimination is one that predates our country. It's one we've really held on to since our common law founding, and was intended to protect us from the invasion of a government into our private matters or affairs that would allow it to extort us or prosecute us unjustly. And I think that's really what we saw there with Dr. Fauci, is this perception of, if I answer these questions, you're going to invade my privacy and prosecute me unjustly.
Yeah. All right. How many times have we seen or read about cases where people are forced into a confession when they're actually innocent?
It certainly happens. There's
Murder on a Sunday Morning. That's a great documentary.
It is.
To watch.
And we know there are people who get put into a corner where they're told, look, this is going to be bad for you either way. It may be less bad if you admit to something you didn't do than if you persist in denying it. We know for a fact we have executed people in the state of Florida, posthumously identified them as being innocent. We know we can get it wrong. We know confessions aren't perfect. We know the criminal prosecution system, as hard as we try, and as important as having really good defense lawyers is to the integrity of that process, it is imperfect. And if you have an option to avoid being entangled in it, certainly I think most people would rather not go through the ordeal of defending themselves against a false allegation if they could help it.
So anyways, when I saw he made that statement, innocent people do not plead the fifth. This is an individual, as I was researching this to prepare for this broadcast, he goes to churches, is invited, he starts preaching, he's an evangelical Christian. So it was ironic. I'm a student of the Word of God, and I thought of this verse. Looks like Jesus pled the fifth.
I mean, he certainly asserted the exact same fundamental right.
Right. Correct. And so I hope he's not, as a Christian, suggesting that Jesus was an innocent by doing that. Anyways, thanks for joining me, Craig. You're awesome. Super. If you want to contact him for any type of what do you cover mainly? I know you do criminal defense and appeals. What other areas do you serve
Yeah.
people in?
So primarily, I still enjoy doing my work with the Florida Innocence Project. That's very important to me. So if you have someone in your life that may be wrongfully convicted, that we may be able to help, I'm always eager to try to work and help restore justice for those people who maybe the system let down or failed. Criminal cases are fine. I also do quite a bit now of civil litigation with the Florida Law Group, leading a trial division there to help litigate cases in disputes where people have been badly injured and aren't being treated fairly or properly by insurance companies or at-fault parties. But really, if you have a legal question, I'm happy to try and help or point you to somebody who can.
Okay, and if you look at the ticker, it's been rolling since the beginning. That his name's there, Attorney Craig Whisenhunt. It's the Florida Law Group, and then the telephone also is on there, 866-598-4348. Haiti Oropesa with Florida You Judge. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.
Thank you so much.